20,000 subs. Okay, Q&A time. Put your business pants on. We're going to LinkedIn first. From Chris Johnson, massive congrats. We have so much amazing tech coming out. It's obvious as firm owners we need to commit to constant change, more so than ever before. But you can wear out your staff if you give them zero consistency. Oh, what tips do you have for the right balance of trying out new tech? Boy, if you are into tech and like you are pushing your firm into modernizing your tech stack, your people are probably exhausted right now. And the really hard thing is this is not a problem that's going to get better. It's just going to get worse as the pace of change continues to increase. The big thing I tell folks, like when I do AI talks, is if you are change management blocked right now, you are going to continue being change management blocked as AI comes and tech continues to improve. And honestly, it's really hard. It's a tough thing to manage, struggled with it in my firm. I would add some nuance to this though. I would say that the fastest moving things right now are actually more on the periphery of tech and the core things that our firms are built on. Our practice management system, accounting ledgers, our tax software. That's not changing. The core things that our firms are built on are not changing all of that fast. And that's not a bad thing. Like if you're on the right platforms, they are building AI into what they do and all that. But it's the stuff more on the periphery that is really, really hard to keep up with. I think a fair trade to make with your team is to make certain types of changes on cycles. If we're gonna change practice management systems, oh my golly, is that a big change? And I think you can make a deal with yourself and with your team to say, we're not gonna change these core things any more frequently than, say a 3-year change cycle. Because without creating boundaries and like some non-negotiables there, then you have this perpetual angst of, are we on the right thing? Do we need to keep looking at this other stuff? Do I need to hop on this webinar to explore this alternative? And you kind of have to make a deal with yourself to turn some of that off. Now, maybe for like lower lift tools, like AI assistants are getting better really quickly right now. Maybe for stuff like that that's changing really fast, it's not a core part of how we work yet. That stuff sure, easier to pick up and have a play with. But your core systems, I think you kind of have to make a deal with your team to say, I want you to help us go through this change cycle. And the deal is, barring some sort of catastrophic tech change, we're gonna stick this one out for at least X years. I would use this to get some buy-in with the team, at least so that they knew there was a light at the end of the tunnel and they weren't just on this perpetual treadmill. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is hire for people who are energized by change. People are either wired that way or they aren't. And what I found buying an 80-year-old firm where you had a whole bunch of people that were not wired to be excited about change, moving that mountain when all of that energy had to be fueled by my batteries, boy, was that a lot of work. But as soon as I made a couple of hires, a couple of my own people, and if you've bought a firm and worked in that sort of mixed family where you're now managing people that other hired, you know how where other people hired, and you know how weird that can be. As soon as you start bringing in a couple of your own people, man, it gets way easier. So if we can find people and actually in the hiring process reward this, folks that are energized by change, to build a culture of change in your firm, that's where the problem really takes care of itself. So set some boundaries around speed of change for your core systems, but also find the right people. Your whole team doesn't have to be wired that way. You'd be surprised how much of a difference just a few energetic folks can make. From Josh Snyder, in search of knowing what pizza provides the greatest motivation for the heralded pizza parties, Papa John's, Pizza Hut, Blaze? It's a pizza party! As only accountants know, nothing boosts morale quite like a pizza party. But what Josh wants to know is what pizza purveyor offers the greatest stat boost? Completely reasonable question. I'd say it depends on the time of year. In the summer, or in a slower time of year, I'm gonna go bougie. I'm not afraid to say it. I have sophisticated tastes. Don't let the Uncrustable wrappers in the garbage can right there fool you. I do. So in the slow season, I'm going bougie. Something local, high quality stuff. But if we are in the heat of busy season, frankly, I'd sooner eat the box that pizza came in than my leftovers that are in the fridge. Great question, Josh. Okay, another one from Chris. I think a tier list of all public accounting software providers would be a great video. I could see how it could not be beneficial to your sponsor pipeline. To be completely honest though, you think I let software companies sponsor my content? Somebody show Chris the door. Tactical Mike?
Yes, sir.
Welcome out. Thank you. Sidebar. Our sponsorships are outbound. We go to brands that we love, that we hear accountants are having great success with, and those are the brands we do sponsorships with. We turn away 80% of brands because honestly, most software platforms are not worth using. A tier list though, it is hard because there's a tool that will be great for one firm and not good for another firm. If you're a tax firm, if you're an accounting firm, if you are a small firm, a mid-sized firm, a big firm, this changes the recommendations completely. That being said, this fall and winter, we are working on things that will give you a more direct path towards a recommendation and putting out more short lists of our highest, like most recommended tools. Again, it depends on context. So there's gonna be some filtering there where we gotta know like what type of firm do you have? What are your growth ambitions? Do you do just tax? Do you do just bookkeeping? Are you hybrid? Do you do advisory? We are trying to put together more stuff like that to shortcut that decision making. Inevitably though, as soon as you do, people will come back and say, whoa, why not this one and that one? And it's like, the reality is it's a bunch of crowdsourced experiences from over 1,000 firms that we've worked with. And so distilling that into something where people can understand why we would recommend this over another thing, that's really tricky, but it's still better than nothing. I still think doing that is better than not doing it. And honestly, we're in a really unique spot here where we don't take any affiliate revenue from anybody and we don't do partnerships. Most groups out there, consulting groups, stuff like that, they do partnerships with brands and they get a kickback anytime somebody goes to that brand. We don't do any of that shit. And if you look around in the accounting ecosystem, how are you going to make a buying decision on a piece of software? Salesperson and what they tell you? No. Maybe you've got a friend that's used that tool. That's great. Like social proof, that's super, super valuable, but it's still a pretty narrow perspective. Man, we've crowdsourced so much input from so many folks in my audience where I feel like we're actually really, really positioned to give solid advice on this. And it is something we're gonna be trying to do more intentionally in the future. So keep an eye out for that. I'm doing my best, Chris, okay? We can let Chris back in.
Yes, sir.
It's okay. To the Instagram. That's right, I've got an Instagram. Kilgore Trout. How do we convince CPAs that the billable hour is dead? Tracking time, fluffing it, whoa, and billing is bad for the partner and the client. Clients need to know how much we cost up front. How do you prove to anybody that they should stop doing hourly billing? You show them a better alternative and prove to them why it's better. So if you are a young whippersnapper, oftentimes what we will do is we will go to the folks who have bought into this and we're like, this is bad. And these are all the problems with it. But the problem is, it's the only proxy that that person knows. It's the only way that they've ever done any billing. And it's not until they can understand how to price and bill things a different approach and be convinced that it is superior. It's not until they see that they will agree that their approach today is crap. It's not enough to tell somebody this is flawed for all these reasons, because of all the ways they know how to do it, it might be flawed, but it's still the least flawed of all of the methodologies they're familiar with. Now, are there a ton of problems with hourly billing? Yes. Is the entire industry built on hourly billing? Absolutely. We got our avocado toast small firms that are like getting more into value billing, fixed pricing based on what the market will pay. Like the progressive stuff that we talk about here is this itty bitty echo chamber of the profession at large. And the reality is, historically, the entire industry has been built on the back of hourly billing. And so what does it take for one little pipsqueak that watched a YouTube video to go to their boss and say, this is wrong? It's a tough hill to climb. What I can say is this is the beauty of doing your own thing. This is the beauty of itty bitty firms. Why do I want to convince them of something that they're just unwilling to do? Like, why am I dying on that hill? You reframe that, it's an opportunity. I'm just gonna go do something better, right? That's the way that I see it. We'll show them, Kilgore. Okay, to Twitter, from Small Town CPA. What are the necessary first steps to move a firm to a paperless office? Oh, buckle in. What systems do I need in place? How to get the staff to buy in to the process change? How much efficiency do you lose in the short term? And how would you time that in the annual cycle? Bless your heart. There's still a ton of paperful firms out there. How do you make the change? With a whole lot of buy-in. There's like accountants that have spent decades doing everything on paper, they will happily do that until the day they die. They're not chomping at the bit to do it a different way. And so that is a really, really hard transition to make. And honestly, while there are benefits like long-term to just that fundamentally better approach, so much of our efficiency comes down to our muscle memory of having done stuff a certain way for years, that it takes years to get back to your past level of efficiency. We changed tax softwares in my 40-person firm because there was an alternative platform that was better. And tax software is one of those things where you develop a huge amount of muscle memory, just knowing where to find that little buried nested menu for that one fiddly little thing. To then have to relearn that on a completely new platform, It was at least 3 years until we had reached our previous levels of productivity on that new platform. Going from paperful to paperless, I would say, is going to be at least that big of a transition. It is honestly these days, like, it is on the level of one of those legacy firms where it's hard to justify anybody buying them because the work of changing over is so onerous. It is a really, really big change. Not to say it can't be done, but it is a big change. Now, it is always worth considering what your role ought to be in that change. I found myself at a firm early in my career where I was full of vigor, of enthusiasm for changing all that stuff, and I'm gonna show to all my senior colleagues why this is better. The reality is, all my colleagues, they're getting paid a flat salary. They want to do the work the way that's most comfortable for them. They're not incentivized to be more productive, so they could care less. This is an uncomfortable thing for them. It didn't matter how much I whiteboarded, well, this is how much more higher output we could be. I could get my bosses to buy into that. But at the end of the day, it's all the people doing the work who are like, this is hard. This is causing me to rewire things in my brain that I don't want to rewire. What's in this for me? And the answer is usually nothing. Because most accountants, the people that do the work, are not incentivized on output. So why would they care if it's a higher, more efficient way to get that work done, right? And if you are the one wearing the hat of the change maker, that's a tall task. Particularly if you are building something valuable for somebody else. That's not even your own thing. Doesn't mean it's not worth doing. I did a lot of it. And it's a really, really good experience. It really is. But there are abundance of progressive firms out there who actually value that mindset and that energy for change and that more progressive viewpoint on how to do things. I can tell you in my case, I probably burned too many years rolling a boulder up a mountain rather than finding a firm that valued me for who I was, rather than being like the outlier within a firm that clearly wanted to operate a different way, right? This plugs very nicely to, I actually help accountants get matched into progressive firms. We've got, I don't know, north of 150 accountants we've run through this now. If you're looking for a progressive firm to work with, my content attracts a bunch of them. I can get you matched into one if you want. So the website is jason.careers. We'll put a link down in the description. From JP Bloom, streamlining the process of bank feeds and other downloads. I think your solution is the best we have right now, but there's got to be something better at some point. Yeah, so we did a podcast recently, kind of my ultimate guide for how to manage having to log into all these different client logins and fetch documents and just all this annoying stuff we got to do. The solution, it's a two-parter. First part is access and how to manage that across a bunch of people, across a bunch of clients. A ton of best practices, things like single sign-on, things like best practices for routing 2FA codes, why voice over IP services don't work for routing SMS messages, and it has to be a carrier line in the US in order to get all those codes. Whole bunch of nuance we dug into on the podcast. I will link that somewhere. If you struggle with that, absolutely check it out. You'll pick up probably a lot, but maybe at least you'll get one helpful tidbit out of it, almost certainly. The second part of this problem, how do we solve for how much work it is to go out and log into all these things to get all this information, is having a clear pre-accounting process. If you haven't seen any of the content I've done on having a pre-accounting process, it's one of the most important things you can build into your accounting firm. I'll put a link to that as well. It starts as a way of getting your professional staff off the hook for having to log into all these things and grab that information by putting it in the hands of a dedicated team. But where it progresses is actually having administrative staff. They start by going out and fetching this stuff, but then what they're doing starts looking a little more like work paper prep. And before you know it, they've actually done 70% of a month-end close before the professional even has to get into the file. Super, super recommend you check that out. I'll link maybe the most relevant pre-accounting thing that I've done down in the video description. But JP, yes, it is still a big pain. It's a hard problem to solve. What's the system that's gonna log into thousands of different vendors and banks and all these different things to be able to pull all that stuff in a standardized way? Not an easy solution. HubDoc back in the day was the closest we had to it, but they've shut down a lot of the fetching that they would go out and do. They don't do that anymore. The closest thing we have to this now is a tool called LedgerSync. LedgerSync.com, we'll put a link to that down below too. For US firms, they're really the only one trying to do as much centralized fetching as possible. But still a pain. Thanks for nothing, big banks. That was satisfying. Okay, what to avoid when starting a firm? Straight to the point, Birdie, I like it. Oh, so many things. Let's start with the squishy things. Lifestyle bloat. In the beginning, you're like, if only I could replace my salary And then you do that and you're like, oh, if only I could get to 1.5x. Then you're like, then 2x. But I still need to keep growing. It's never enough. I believe it was the philosopher Alex Hormozy who once said that if you look forward and think, yeah, at this level of financial success, I'm gonna be happy. And then you find yourself there, you get there and you're not happy. Then that next level that you're looking at, I'm gonna tell you right now, you're not gonna be happy at. And until you solve the underlying problem there, like no amount of success and growth is going to get you to a place where you actually enjoy what you do, because most of the folks that go out and do their own thing, they blow through the notion of what they thought financial freedom was so fast. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like, not to diminish the early days of launching a firm, it is squeaky bum time for sure, but very quickly people get through that. And then they unlock like a new form of suffering where they now have total agency and can do whatever they want, but somehow they find themselves unhappy because they've committed too much. They keep growing for Lord knows what reason. When if your 5-year-old self or 12-month ago self could see yourself, like you'd be like, wow, that is an unbelievable amount of success. Chill, bro. Like, you don't need to do any more. That's the biggest squishy thing. On the more tactical front, I would say, and a lot of people disagree with me on this, that the biggest trap in client acquisition is thinking that in the beginning you need to go wide to take anything and everything to get started. When that's actually the hardest way to find people. The easier way to find people, if you do it right, is the opposite, getting really, really specific and figuring out what is the shortest path to becoming a guru for a specific type of client avatar. And I'll let you in on a secret, is to be the guru is a product of visibility. It's not actually a product of like technical expertise, which grinds our gears because we are accountants. But being perceived as the guru is simply a product of being more visible than anybody else in the space. And we're gonna have that blocker of like, well, I can't be the guru. In fact, I can't pretend to be the guru until I work with a whole bunch of these people, right? You got that chicken and the egg thing? Well, I mean, let me ask you this. Any other general firm who would have a beekeeping client walk in and that's their very first beekeeping client, they're gonna look at that and be like, well, yeah, we could probably figure that out. So what makes you any less of a guru than them? Because as soon as you start having conversations in this space, and even if you have a little bit of foundational knowledge because it's just something that you're interested in, you are already more qualified than 95% of firms out there who are generalists and would happily take that client even if that was the only beekeeper they ever had. So biggest misnomer in how you build that client base is that you can't start specific. You absolutely can start specific. It's the easiest way to find people on new media, your website, social media, networking, going to conferences. I really push people to go narrow instead of wide. And this is a hot take, honestly, that a lot of people still don't agree with. But the very first hire I would make in my firm is a junior staff member offshore. Roll the music! The sponsor of this video, Cloud Accountant Staffing. They help you find talented accountants in the Philippines. But honestly, I'm not even gonna talk about them. I'm gonna tell you my story, which I recently shared on a podcast. On a podcast, I drafted who my first 20 hires would be from 1 to 20. I'll just spoil it for you right now. First hire, junior offshore accountant. Second hire, junior offshore accountant. Third, a contract group for overflow support. Fourth, a contract virtual assistant. It's not until my fifth hire that I hire somebody onshore. By the end of my first 20 hires, 13 offshore. The reason? Because I did it in my firm and it worked really, really, really well. My firm, my CAS practice that I was building was distributed, virtual. People worked everywhere. So it didn't matter like what country they were in. Like it literally made no difference if they're in the US, Canada, the Philippines, whatever. And if you haven't done it before, yes, you have loads of questions, as I did too. It was actually a really smart firm runner that just like swore by this, where I'm like, this makes no sense to me, but because you are so convicted, I will learn more about it. And in the process, learn how to handle, 7216 disclosures, security, stuff like that. You just have to navigate all that to learn. Cloud Accountant Staffing, this video's sponsor. They've walked a ton of people through that process. Don't try to figure it out yourself. Their story actually is he ran a firm, the guy behind it, had so much luck with their Filipino accountants that they started hiring recruiters in the Philippines to find them more people, and then they just started doing that for other firms. People think I shill for offshore groups. Reality is 50% of the hires that I made in my firm the last year or two were in the Philippines. There are 2 Filipino placement groups that I do ad partnerships with, because it's the same thing that I would do if I ran my firm. Okay, enough of the music. Gang, thank you all for being here. There's so many really smart people that like tune into this content, and I feel like I'm in such a privileged place to be able to take the smartest things that people are doing and bounce them back to the profession so that we can all learn and get better. 7 years ago, I was a snot-nosed staff accountant inside of a small firm. I didn't know anybody outside of my own little firm bubble. You'd be amazed how quickly you can grow into a incredibly capable accountant just by getting around other smart people. We do a version of that on this channel, but hopefully if it does anything for you, it broadens your world, gets you outside of your firm groupthink. And in the comments or community or social media, wherever it's happening, you make a couple friends along the way, because making relationships with other people in the profession, it is so rewarding just from a sustainability standpoint, but you also learn a bunch in the process. If you want to laugh, you want to see my 1,000 sub Q&A? One of the only videos on my channel where my kids appeared. I think my wife's even in there. I'll link that one because it's pretty funny. Bye.